So we apologize, we had some technical difficulties, but we're back and we're making some blueberry scones. Julie has already pre-measured out 2 cups of what we're using today is fine pastry flour. This is ideal for biscuit, but you can certainly always use all-purpose flour as well. We are now going to add the remainder of our dry ingredients. So to our dry ingredients, we're also going to add a tablespoon of double-acting baking powder. So there's always going to be leavening ingredients when you're making biscuits or scones because you want them fluffy. And there's a couple of ways to achieve that. But baking powder and a combination of baking soda are usually your optimal choice. So we're going to add a tablespoon of baking powder. And actually, Chloe, I'm going to get you started here with our wet ingredients. So we're going to add our 1/2 cup of heavy cream into this bowl. And you're going to crack 1 egg into that. So back to this is baking soda. And baking soda, we're going to be adding actually 1/2 teaspoon of that. So it goes into our dry ingredients. And then we have 1/2 teaspoon of salt. So we've put 2 cups of flour, our tablespoon of baking powder, 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, 1/2 teaspoon of salt in our food processor bowl. Over here, Chloe has added 1/2 cup of heavy cream, a whole farm fresh egg, and we're going to add to the liquid ingredients some vanilla. In this case, I like a lot of vanilla, so we're going to use a full teaspoon of pure vanilla extract. Don't use the imitation stuff. It's not as good. So this is now what we're going to be doing here. We're doing the quick, easy way, and later on when we do our biscuits, you'll see the hand cutting with a pastry blender. But what we're going to be achieving here is we're going to be combining our dry ingredients, and we're going to put our butter in here, which is very cold. I actually kept this in the freezer. Cold ingredients are important because you don't want the butter to melt. It's the idea of keeping the fat solid and having it break down into little bits and pieces that are flour covered. When you put the little flour covered bits of fat together, that's how you get flakiness. So we can start adding little chunks of this is 6 tablespoons of, I use salted butter. A lot of people like to bake only with unsalted butter. I like the little bit of salt. I think it helps to add extra flavor. So you can, I'm going to pulse our dry ingredients to combine that baking powder, baking soda, salt, and flour. And now we're going to add little chunks. You can add them all at once. So if we were doing this in the mixing bowl right now, we would be taking all of our dry ingredients into the bowl with the chunks of butter, and we would be using this rocking motion with this. And we will demonstrate this definitely later with the buttermilk biscuits. But in this case, you're going to see how easy this is. If you have a food processor at home, this is definitely the way to go. But it's not to say that if you don't have one that you can't certainly duplicate this at home with the old-fashioned method. So we're just going to press high. Whoa, that's the baby's rocking. Watch out. So, whoa, Nelly. I guess that's because the butter's frozen. It's a little dramatic. Let's see how we're doing here. You can actually hear by the sound of it when it stops, when it's actually getting to where it needs to be. And I just want to show you guys the texture. If you want to come in close here. These little pieces, it's supposed to look almost like a coarse cornmeal when it's done correctly. If you actually want to put your fingers in it, you're welcome to. You can feel the little bits of butter. Those little chunks. Flour-covered chunks of butter.
What exactly are the ingredients in there now?
We have our flour. We have our 2 cups of flour. We have a tablespoon of baking powder. We have 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda and 1/2 teaspoon of, we put sea salt in here. And we've got 6 tablespoons of butter. And so that's pretty much where we want it. We have our small little bits of butter that are flour coated, and that's what we want. So if we were again doing it with our hand method, that's what we would be trying to achieve. And it takes a while. It's doable, but it does take a while with this, which is why this is such an easier thing. So Chloe, if you want to come up here and whisk this up and break up the egg yolk, and we'll get that into a nice homogeneous texture.
Can you use a regular blender?
A blender would not be advised for
Because
this.
it won't cut the butter right.
It's not going to cut, no, it's just going to mix from the bottom, so it's not going to really do what we need it to do. And at this point, once we've gotten our fat broken down into little bits and pieces, and when we add our liquid ingredients that Chloe's working on right now, we want the amount of time that we actually mix the dough to be very minimal. If you overwork biscuit dough, a couple of things will happen. You're not going to achieve those little bits of butter anymore. It's going to melt up and it's going to become more homogeneous texture, and that's actually not helpful. You're not going to get the leavening, you're not going to get the layers and the flakiness. So this is a spouted bowl, so it's really convenient for pouring into here. So Chloe, if you want to bring that bowl over here, and we can start just dump that right into our feed tube here. Beautiful. And I actually have a rubber scoop right here. Get all that in. Perfect. Wonderful. So that's in here. So instead of pressing the high button like I did with blending up the butter into the flour, I'm going to pulse this. And actually, you'll see that it's going to start to make like a craggy dough. It's not going to look perfect, and you don't want it to be. It's not going to be like one of those doughs that looks like a cohesive ball. So another thing I want to mention about this type of baking is that parchment paper is your best friend. It's great for lining your baking sheets because it actually helps to control a lot of the mess, and it works great to create a clean surface area that's non-stick. So you want to have parchment paper if you're doing this type of thing. It definitely makes things easier. Can we put this over there? That'd be great. Thank you.
So how do you know when to stop? How do you know it's good?
You can actually pinch it together and it's kind of forming. So we're going to take this off of here. I'm actually going to dump this here, which I know looks crazy. Let's not panic. Everything is okay. It looks a little bit disparaging, but here we go. And actually, you can use this paper. I'm going to actually throw in my blueberries now, because this is probably the best way to...
It's a little bit like pie crust, right?
It is. It's actually really similar. I mean, it is pastry, so... Yeah, pie crust is kind of the same phenomenon, right? We're breaking down, you know, I remember back in the day, my mom didn't actually have the food processor, nor did she have this little handy-dandy food blender, but she actually used to use two butter knives. And I remember the sound of the knives making, the rubbing against the bottom of the bowl. Yeah, that's a way of cutting your cutting.
Where'd you get your blueberries from?
These blueberries are not my fresh picked blueberries that I froze. They're not. These are from Trader Joe's, but they're a wild blueberry. And I'm actually using the parchment paper to kind of, I don't want to overwork this dough, right? So you can see it's crumbly. And it's getting there.
And the blueberries are still fully frozen there?
I like to use them frozen. That's a really good question. If I use them thawed out, they're going to bust up a lot, and you'll see that they're going to bleed a little bit here. I don't like the look of when pastry turns purple. It's not going to taste bad. I just think visually it kind of just looks a little bit less appealing. It actually can end up looking a little green sometimes. I guess the yellow of the dough mixed with the blue of the... So I'm making a disc here, and it's roughly about a ½ inch thick. And you saw I didn't knead that dough. I just really tried to make it a cohesive mass. I want it pretty round. And if someone wants to come and just brush the entire top of this disc with heavy cream, that would be great. That's perfect. Yeah, this little guy doesn't stay on there too well. So, and Chloe, if you want to come, and you can sprinkle the surface of this liberally with that granulated sugar. Oh, that came off again. Then we can use it that way. Okay. And go ahead. You can keep going, it's good. Because this actually gives it a really nice crispy crust on top with a heavy cream and a little bit of granulated sugar. Because scones aren't supposed to be, you know, terribly sweet. Oh, look at my hands. That looks kind of gross. Okay, that's beautiful. So now I'm going to use, pizza cutter is an easy way to do this, but you can do it with a chef's knife or any sharp knife. And I'm going to be cutting it into wedges. And the reason I cream in sugar here is that if I do this while it's on the baking sheet, anything that falls off the edges is kind of going to burn at the bottom of the pan, and you don't want that. So I'm cutting this into wedges. And again, they don't look perfect, right? I mean, they've got rough edges, but this is delicious. All right. Someone wants to just stabilize this for me and hold that there. I'm going to use my spatula to kind of lift this off here. And I've got my baking sheet. I actually have it doubled, and there's a reason for that. Sometimes if your oven bakes a little hot, if you don't double your sheet pans, you can end up with bottoms that are a little too brown. And the parchment paper.
Doesn't matter how far apart they are?
They're going to rise, but they're not going to expand horizontally too much, so about 1 inch apart is probably sufficient. They look like little pieces of blueberry pie right now, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I've had my oven preheated at 400. You usually want to bake any kind of pastry like this at a high heat. It kind of helps the process along. I'm going to go bring these into the oven, and I'll be right back. So if someone wants to set their timer, I'm going to go wash my hands.
How long?
For like about 10 to 12 minutes. Let me just double check that. I kind of eyeball them to know for sure. The recipe actually, it says 15 to 18, so we'll check them at 12 minutes.